Good evening and welcome, everybody. I hope you can hear us okay. Thank you all for coming this Thursday evening. I'm Johan Wikner, I'm the Global Director of Exhibitions at Fotografiska, joined here tonight with our guest of honor, of course, for the new exhibition downstairs double feature, Marco Brambilla. Welcome. Thank you very much. This is not your first visit to Sweden, Marco, but it's your first visit to the museum. But we've had the honor of working together, or I've had the honor of working with you for the past year or so on this exhibition that I hope you all saw downstairs, double feature, which actually premiered at Fotografiska Shanghai last summer, and then traveled to Fotografiska in Berlin over the winter, and now coming here to Stockholm, which we are so happy about. And the two works that we show downstairs, Civilization from 2008 and Heaven's Gate from 2022, are the first and the latest works from your Megaplex series. Could you tell us a little bit about this series of yours?
Absolutely. So in 2008, I made Civilization, which is showing downstairs, and came up with the technique of sampling films and then creating a moving collage from those films. So that hadn't been done before. And it was very much trial and error at the time. So it was a composition that would start as a still composition and then eventually take on movement and then eventually become a three-dimensional composition. And the process was a very long process to make the first work. And then through the next 12 years, that series expanded into 3 more works, and the latest one is also downstairs, which is entitled Heaven's Gate, and that work was actually conceived as a virtual reality work at one point. We also were able to show it at Outernet in London, which is the largest immersive space in Europe, and the Sphere in Las Vegas. I don't know if you're familiar with the giant Sphere, but that was also one of the first art pieces on the exterior of the Sphere. And in each case, the subject is very personal to me because I used to be a film director in Hollywood, and one of the things that displaced me from Hollywood was this idea of the kind of spectacle overtaking content in film, and this idea of films becoming increasingly generic. So I decided to make work that would comment on this. So this is kind of a visual overload that exists in contemporary mainstream film, but it also suggests this kind of sensory overload that we experience in our everyday lives through the news cycle, through media saturation. So we live in this world which is very much a spectacle, especially today, especially now, where you have situations politically all over the world which are so spectacle-based. So this work has become, in a way, Heaven's Gate has actually become more topical in showing it here after the US elections recently. Many people come up to me and they say, it was this about the elections just now. I think, no, this was about the last elections, but it's happening again now. So the works technically are very challenging to make, but as you say, this is the most recent, and I think with advances in AI, with the technology to put the images together, it's become much more seamless. So I'm working on one right now that will be shown in Miami for Miami Basel. And for that, I'm using AI to source a lot of images, not to actually make the work, but to actually enable me to find more samples more efficiently.
So that is a tool that you use, or various technologies. Yeah. But I think that's one of the most striking things when you, as a viewer, discover your work, is thinking, how exactly are these made? Because there are so many references, of course, and we can recognize all these films and these Hollywood icons in it. Could you delve in a little bit deeper on how you actually create them? How is it?
It starts very, very low tech. So the way I start is I have printouts of shots from films, and it's very personal because it's very much about my own memory of films. So I used to watch 2 films a day as a child, and I remember my memory of a scene in the film may not be exactly the way it looks in the film, and then that takes you in a slightly different direction. But I start with printouts of these scenes, and in my studio I would have hundreds of these printouts, and then you form these associations and new narratives between elements that are completely disconnected. So elements that have nothing to do with one another take on a different meaning when you juxtapose them. And this, again, starts as a paper collage because it's actually much faster to work that way. And then from there, we go into the electronic realm, and it becomes a Photoshop document that I make on a giant canvas. And then from there, we put it into motion. And then when it's in motion, we're using very short samples that the first work actually came before GIFs, but now GIFs are obviously the terminology that people use because people are used to seeing these kind of memes on social media, etc. And once it's in motion, it takes on another significance. So then you make more adjustments. And then I finally go into 3D. So then it's mapping all the different layers on 3D landscapes. And it's not real 3D. It's more like a pop-up book. It's all more like 2.5D. And it has this very artisanal quality to it. It doesn't feel electronic because it's not electronic, because all the samples are made from some vintage films, some current films, but they all have a certain texture. And what's most fun about the process for me is this kind of stream of consciousness that I get into when you're working with hundreds of images at the same time. You're dreaming about these images. You're watching films with the work in mind. So as you're watching a film, I'll think, this should be in that section of Heaven's Gate, or this should be in this section. And then it's a very fluid process. And that process takes about 4 to 5 months. And then finally, the work is never really finished, because when you're sampling, you could always make it a work in progress, but then at a certain point there'll be a show that happens, and then that's your deadline, and that's when you're finished.
And another, I think, interesting format in the movement as well is the loop, the continuous movement, and the vertical aspect of how it scrolls in front of our eyes. And it has no ending or beginning, really. It just continues, a constant motion. What kind of drew you to that structure and that sort of temporal looping? And what do you think that makes us as viewers perceive from the work?
Well, I think that's a larger topic of video art, and when a film or a video is shown in the context of a museum or a gallery, you don't have a set start and finish time, because you have people coming in halfway through, at the end, at the beginning. So the loop is a very natural way to consider time-based media as something that is not chronological. So the loop also works for this subject matter, because both pieces are essentially about the circle of life. So there's rebirth at the beginning, and from the chaos, birth begins again, and the loop starts again. In Heaven's Gate, there's one character at the bottom of the collage, which is a single human being, and he's ascending into various levels of civilization. So the Industrial Revolution, this kind of capitalistic heaven, which Leonardo DiCaprio is in. And as the apocalypse comes and it gets more chaotic, he's reborn into the primal self again. So the loop connects the two states. So I think the loop makes sense for both those reasons.
Yeah. And it's also, to me at least, I think it's a fun euphemism of like scrolling on your phone. You know, we're so used to this endless scrolling of news or Instagram feeds, social media feeds, what have you, that is also constantly bombarding us with these impressions.
Yeah, it's definitely taken on that meaning, which wasn't intentional at the beginning. But as you say, people do scroll, people look at GIFs all the time. So all these things have become part of our daily existence.
And you mentioned this sort of beginning and end and being reborn and loop. And you work with these cycles in both these works and others of yours as well. It's like cycles of life, like you said, or culture or excess or religion almost. What drives you in that sense? Does it feel like the life is on a constant loop? Where do you draw this energy from to bring into the work?
I think that the friction between pop culture and art history is an interesting dynamic. So I chose to set each of these works in a kind of either Baroque or Renaissance, an inspiration for Civilization was run with Bosch, and then you have Bruegel as an inspiration for Heaven's Gate. So these are all very art historical contexts, which have usually been related to religion, human conflict, war. These are the themes that Renaissance painters were dealing with. And now when you see that canvas being populated by Rihanna and Leonardo DiCaprio, but within that kind of structure, I think it adds another layer of friction. So you're seeing something that should be like the Sistine Chapel, but it's populated by pop culture now, and it's no longer populated by these sacred symbols.
You mentioned before also the use of AI as a tool that helped you create these pieces. It's an interesting topic, of course, and a lot of discussion is going on around AI right now. How exactly have you used it? What's your sort of thought on using AI or that kind of future technology in creative processes?
I think it's an incredible tool to help the craftsmanship of what it is that you're making, whether it's a photograph or a film. I think the misconception is that it's an end-to-end use tool now, where you have a lot of technology which is text-based, which creates videos and images, and you have this kind of flooding of easy imagery, which is really reserved more for kind of low quality interaction like social media, etc. I think it's going to be very good for that. But I think in a way it's more, from the way I like to use it, is I use it more as a way to source images, a way to do impossible amounts of work in a very short time. So for instance, the work I made for the Sphere in Las Vegas, we had 3 months versus a year to make this work. So I was able to use AI to identify film clips. So, but in the sense that the author wants to have a hand in what you're saying, sure, you can program AI with all the film clips, and it can make something that's similar. But I think it wouldn't be so interesting for me to watch a tool make work, and I think that's the danger. And then there's also the issues, the ethical issues of use of AI, where unfortunately, since it's scraping from existing work, whether it exists online or whether you're training AI models with custom imagery, if it's ripping off a famous artist, like let's say Andy Warhol, then that company will probably get sued and you won't be able to rip off Andy Warhol using AI. But for kind of unknown artists or artists who are just starting, the problem becomes that their work can be ripped off very easily using this tool, and they have no means to protect themselves because their work is not in the public realm in a way that it's enforceable. And I think that's the very dangerous thing. So when you have an artist who's starting, maybe a photographer, and you see their work being ripped off, then how does that emotionally, how does that motivate you to make work if it becomes so easy for many, many, many people to do it? That's the truth. I think it's more of a psychological thing.
And brief, quick question about the Sphere in Las Vegas, because it's a very interesting place, or interesting. I don't know if you all know it, but it's basically Globen that we have here in Stockholm, but covered in LED screens. So there's like a globe screen. How much more difficult is it from creating, a square 16 by 9 piece to actually show something on a sphere?
Yeah, it was infinitely more complicated because the resolution is 16K by 16K, which is like 4 IMAX screens put together. So when we first tested, I remember I went to Las Vegas, we tested it with the sketch that I'd made of the work. And then after the test, you realize that now I'm going to need 8 times the amount of material to give it the same relative density that you would have here. So it became an incredibly labor-intensive process to make work. But then in terms of the payoff from that, like when I saw it being tested, the final piece, and I was at the opening, you have this incredible, it's almost like a technological breakthrough, because the building disappears and the building becomes the content. So it's in the spirit of archigram, which is these great architectural collectives from the 70s. They talked about these plug-in cities that would change their aspect according to who's living in the city, what they're doing. It's essentially a very utopian concept. It can be anything inside and outside. So I think it was a very exciting project to do, and I look forward to the next one as well.
Final question then. There are so many themes, like you've talked about, and present in your work, and so many technologies that you're using and pushing, new technology and new methods of working. So is there anything on your horizon that you're sort of looking forward to trying out when it comes to new technologies or places to exhibit? Will there be a new Megaplex, or are you working on something completely different?
I'm working on a project which deals with world expos, historical world expos, and how they came to represent a kind of utopian vision for us, and how technology would play a role in a better living through technology. So I've picked, at this point, I think I picked 18 different world expos up until Osaka 2025, which is opening, it's opening, I think, today. And we're recreating these kind of utopian panoramas using reinventions of these expos. And for this project, I did use AI to question the way we see our past, because AI is also used for disinformation online, et cetera, how it shifts reality, and how our future utopia, which would exist virtually, whether we're now passengers in this cycle of autonomous dreaming by AI, and where that's going to go. And it doesn't really editorialize AI one way or the other, but it is that it's a statement about this using world expos. I'm very excited about that. That's showing in Miami and at Miami Basel at the Wolfsonian Museum in December.
Cool. Marco, thank you so much for being here tonight, for having this talk. Thank you for the work that you are doing in such a beautiful way. I think it's fantastic how you touch on these topics and bring these themes in a very, approachable way for a lot of people, I think, through this medium and how you are using the work. So thank you. We look forward to what you're doing next, and hope to have you back in Stockholm soon again. And thank you for working on this with us. It's been a great pleasure to have you.
Yeah, it's been a pleasure. Shanghai. This is the third and last stop for the double feature, and we started in Shanghai, and then Berlin, and now Stockholm. So it's been a great experience, and really thank you and your team.
Thank you so much. And thank you all for coming tonight.